Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this is part two of looking at people who are introverts, who might have Asperger's, who might have been bullied, who have social anxiety, social awkwardness. Um, I'm not a professional. I'm not trying to pretend to be one or anything like that. This is just for the purpose of showing how astrology can indicate these things in the chart. And I'm coming up with these myself. So I haven't really looked to see what so called experts might say about it who have books or websites. I just wanted to do one on my own. I've already done the house placements with certain planets, and I have Chiron, the asteroid, as well, mentioned for certain houses, and Black Moon Lilith, another asteroid. So now I'm talking about aspects. If you're interested in the house placements, you can check my other video. This is part two. So I have a list that I've compiled here. The first one is if you have your sun squaring or opposing Uranus. I have the square to Uranus. And if somebody has, for instance, a trine, sextile, or even conjunction from the sun to Uranus, you can be quirky, and other people will accept that as a legitimate part of your personality. They may say that it's endearing and things like that. If you have hard angles like squares or oppositions, then people may find your quirks off-putting in some way. I joke a lot, I laugh a lot about this having a square because I just know that it can rub people the wrong way when I'm dealing with them. When I was younger, I think it was more of an issue because maybe I was more concerned with being accepted, and now I'm not. And it's not to say that I'm completely unaccepted by everyone, but it just is a regular occurrence. And yeah, sometimes it's annoying. It's not necessarily how you look. The I could have put something with the ascendant, actually. Probably should do that, because I think that yeah, maybe like well, I'll talk about that next. But with the square, there can be this sense of I would say with both of these, there are going to be similar situations where how you present yourself, and this is not just physical appearance, that could be more of the ascendant, but the way that the things that you want to do in life, they are at odds with other people. With the opposition, you can find that there are actual people opposing you in some way. They may be trying to get you to stop being different. I think with the square, it's just a frustration that you encounter maybe time and time again, that you are met with people who just don't vibe with you and think that you're kind of weird. And maybe you are weird, but it's something that they don't see as endearing. And I'm not saying everybody, because I have a partner, a long-term partner, and he doesn't even I don't think he thinks that it is weird how I act or who I am. I think he has a trine between his sun and Uranus because he's kind of different too, but he gets more accepted for that. It is what it is, right? And at a certain point, we have to accept these things that seem like it's very hard for them to change. Um, of course, you can always try to conform to other people if you choose to. Remember that when two planets are making contact, like especially if it's a sun sign, it's going to mean that your sign is going to take on that flavor of whatever that planet is. So, and the sign that it rules. So if you have even like a square, I mean, a conjunction, it'll be more seamless because it's like aligned, it's joining forces. But even with the square, it's like you're an Aquarius person, but you're kind of an oddball. You're not just a rebel or a nonconformist. So there's that kind of quality of other people maybe judging that aspect of yourself. So I'm going to talk about hard angles to the ascendant from the sun, because the rising sign is a calling card. And so this is the first thing that people see. So if you have some kind of mannerisms or even appearance that clashes with your sun sign, it can be hard for people to accept the real you. Again, it's not the real self, which is beyond this incarnation, this lifetime, where you're having these particular aspects. So it's all about the current situation, which is temporary. And that's one thing to also keep in mind, that this too shall pass. And you don't have to identify with that. You don't have to identify with what other people say or do that involves you. You can choose to transcend that. And, I have what do you call it? Not a square, not an opposition, an in conjunction from my sun to my ascendant. My sun is in Sagittarius, my ascendant is Taurus. When I was younger, before my first Saturn return, before the age of 30, I was dressing very provocatively. It was really important for me to look sexy when I was in my teens and 20s. And then I got over it. And I look at other women, usually young women, who are doing that. And I'm not impressed by that. I think that there is, whether you want to call it insecurity or just wanting attention, which is, you could say that's a form of insecurity, but attention getting for some way, I see it that way. Doesn't mean I judge anyone, but I don't see that in a positive light. But I did that. And it was very much opposed to who I really was. So it was false advertising. And a lot of people, I think, didn't really know what to make of me, because who I was, it was so disjointed compared to how I was presenting myself. And I think I'm much more authentic now. So it just goes to show that you can actually transcend these things. You can integrate these very disjointed parts of yourself when you have conscious awareness of it. So the reason that I bring this up is that I still experience this, and maybe some of you have experienced this. If you go to a certain place regularly, maybe it's a cafe, maybe it's a restaurant or whatever, and it seems like if you're dealing with a particular person there and they just are cold to you, or they, you know what I mean? And the real thing that messes with your mind, because I have tried, and I think this is a good thing to do, to say maybe this person is just distracted. It has nothing to do. It could have nothing to do with me. But what really, was weird was when the person didn't say anything to me when I walked in. Not that I need them to just like warmly greet me, but then somebody else walked in behind them. They go, "Oh, hi," to that person. So it makes you think, okay, are they dissing me specifically? And I had that experience. And then yesterday I had the same individual do something else that I felt was very unfriendly again. And this is not only the second time. I mean, this was at least the second time where I experienced this from this person. And so I actually said hi to that person first so that they would, to see how they would act towards me. So when we're in these situations and the ascendant is involved, and let's say you are somebody who is of a different race or ethnicity than the person that is reacting to you in that way. And this is kind of how it was with me being a person of mixed heritage. I could say something like that. Oh, maybe that person's prejudiced. But, it really isn't, it ultimately doesn't matter what that person thinks, because the truth is that prejudice can take many forms. A person can be prejudiced against you and be the same race as you if they don't like the way that you look because they think that you're not attractive. They think that you're wearing clothes that they don't approve of. I mean, people can be very petty, and it's coming from a trigger within themselves, I would say, a lot of times that you may know nothing about. If a person actually did that to you, um, and you think that there's something wrong with yourself, and you start to act like there's something wrong with yourself, that is really the issue. So if you have a square or opposition, or even like me, and in conjunction between the sun and the ascendant, and you have felt like you have been discriminated against, or maybe you feel like people don't warm up to you because they see you acting a certain way socially, and you're frustrated that it's not really who you are, then I feel that you have to uh, bring that consciousness to yourself, because it's really not going to come from the outer world. People have a different level of advancement depending on the individual, and some people are very reactive. They're very much, and when I say reactive, it doesn't mean in an outer way. They just constantly are reacting to stimuli, and it's triggering these ideas in their mind because they have a lot of concepts. That's really what prejudice is all about, is that it is forming these connections to past events, and it's making people treat people a certain way. And that really creates a lot of problems for people because they don't have a sense of objectivity. They have way too much subjectivity, and that causes them to view the world from a very limited lens that is based on the past, is based on their past experiences. So, the reason I've devoted so much time to that particular aspect with the ascendant is that I feel that a lot of people struggle with this, and they blame themselves, and they try to fit into somebody else's standards so that they will be accepted. And I feel like that's a mistake. On the other hand, if you are like how I used to be, and you're trying to appeal to others, even if, let's say, you're a single woman. I'm going to say a woman because this is typically how it plays out, and it deals with the opposite sex, um, where you're dressing in a certain way that you want to attract the opposite sex, and yet when it happens, you get upset if they are coming on to you, let's say, and you feel like they are being overly sexual. in their conversations, then you have to, bring it back to yourself. Um, they always say, oh, it doesn't matter what you wear and all that stuff. Nobody has a right to, approach you or anything. But of course, nobody has a right to attack you or anything. But people will approach other people if they are attracted to them. That's just how it works. If you're dressed in a baggy sweater and you're not going to attract attention, you're going to blend into the woodwork, and the chances of you getting approached are much less. Let's get honest here. So I remember these two young women last summer getting on my train, and they were wearing, I think they both were, but at least one was wearing a dress that was so short and skin tight and, plunging neckline. They were sitting down, and there was this older gentleman that kept looking at them, and he started trying to converse with them, and they ignored him, which I think is, that's not a good idea because you want to treat everyone like they are human beings. You don't want to act like, oh, wow, I'm not going to even talk to that person. But they probably felt that if they talked to him, that they would encourage him. And I noticed that they kind of whispered amongst themselves. They jumped off the train, but they didn't leave the platform. They just jumped into another car. And that was to get away from this guy, because I saw them later get off the train. And I thought to myself, why, did they do that in the first place? Why did they wear those outfits? And I know that this is probably going to bother people hearing these things, but I really want to say that we have control over what we do. And I was the same way, but unlike a lot of young women these days, when I was that age, I was very friendly to any man who approached me. And I had been with my partner for many years, so it wasn't that I was looking for a date. So I would say to them, I'm already involved with someone. Thank you, though, and be very cordial. And so if you're on the younger side and you find that you have a tendency to dress in a way that makes you upset that other people are not understanding who you really are, think about that. It doesn't have to be, dressing provocatively. It can be that you are that you have blue hair and you have like a you know like a lip piercing and a nose piercing, and you're pissed off that people think that you are wildly liberal and you're actually very subdued, and you actually consider yourself conservative. I'm not saying you couldn't be, but I'm saying that you're, dressed in a way that's going to make people think that. So it could be some of these themes that are coming up, and that could make you at odds with other people, and they could actually kind of what's the word, exclude you from things because they feel they judge you based on appearances. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to be excluded sometimes, because chances are you don't vibe with them. But I'm just saying that kind of thing is how it happens, and people feel very upset about it. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about the Sun squaring or opposing Mars. I'm also going to just bring in Mars squaring or opposing the Ascendant. I think that there can be similar themes here. With the Sun opposing Mars, or a square, this can be somebody who has a chip on their shoulder. Perhaps in life, for some reason, that you have felt like you've been held back. Mars can be your ambition. The sun can too. The sun can be your goals. Mars can be your ambition. And if it's a square, there's a feeling like it's being thwarted. Feeling like the deck is stacked against you in some way. The opposition, there might be this imaginary person that you feel is keeping you down. The man is keeping you down or whatever. And sometimes people have a chip on their shoulder for other reasons that they have assigned to what is keeping them down. Maybe this is more of the opposition. I don't know, because it's like projection onto a certain thing. Race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, looks. These are the things that are keeping me down. This is why I can't get ahead, because I am a woman and women are oppressed. Down with the patriarchy. These kinds of things. And, I'm laughing. I'm not saying that there's never been any prejudice. I'm not saying there's never been any kind of thwarting of people. But you know what? It was a lot more the case 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. If you're a woman and you go and look at those commercials from the early 60s with, or the 50s with coffee, and the men are like dissing their coffee, they're hilarious, but they're also indicative of a very patronizing attitude towards women that was real. Nowadays, it's okay to put down men. The tide has turned, and people have embraced that because they feel like men deserve it. So that kind of thing is unfortunate because it's the same old, same old. It's just rebranded. What is acceptable? Who is acceptable to be slammed now? However, I would say to any young man that if you embrace that victimhood, even if it's 100% true that there has been this campaign to, make men look bad, you have to transcend that. And if you go through life being angry about it and having a chip on your shoulder, that's not going to help matters. The same thing if you are a person of color, and even if you have experienced things directly. I have, and I grew up in a very liberal area. I had somebody yell out of a car when I was 19 years old, an ethnic slur based on my ethnicity. And, to tell you the truth, that was a watershed moment because I said to myself, oh, okay, because this was before political correctness was really around. But I grew up in this so-called progressive, open-minded, liberal community, and yet somebody yelled a slur out the window. And it made me realize that these things are undercover, but they exist. Now, what if I had taken that and then identified as being oppressed and saw everything through the lens of, I'm Hispanic on one side of the family. I look it, and therefore everybody is prejudiced against me, and that's why I can't get this job. That's why I can't have people treat me always in a respectful manner, and yada yada. Those kinds of things are, I think, very commonplace. And what happens with these squares or oppositions from the sun to Mars or Mars to the Ascendant is that you're going to carry yourself in a way that's very aggressive. In some cases, you can be overly competitive. You might be very like you might be very easy to offend. You might get angry very easily, feeling that you are being dissed, and you're going to act like that. And when that happens, that generates a whole other set of situations. And that's all coming from you. It's not even coming from other things. It's all about how you're reacting to it. So that's another example of that. And in this particular case, there are some cases that I'm bringing up here that are kind of like self-inflicted. And then it causes other people to react. So I'm not saying that every case of being isolated from others, or what's the word, ostracized, is coming from just you randomly experiencing it. Sometimes it can be because the behavior is off-putting, and it actually does cause other people to kind of back off. So that sense of aggression, in terms of being too competitive, being too like overbearing, demanding, the person who is very demanding with like customer service and acting very abrasive. These kinds of things can definitely work against a person and socially ostracize them. And the sad thing is, some people, if they lack awareness of this, they're not going to be able to adjust, because they don't know that it's something that they are doing that is creating that. The Sun square or opposing Saturn can be connected to an authority figure, and this, is usually the parent at the beginning, but it can be a pattern, and it can be a boss and things like that. But the Sun is our light that we shine, and with Saturn, there's some kind of like restriction on that, where somebody doesn't want you to be creative, and this can lead to a person feeling very self-conscious. And so that this is another situation where you can take yourself out of circulation. It's kind of like when somebody has the sun or moon in the 12th house, and they tend to self-isolate. They do this themselves, but then they may say, oh, especially with the moon, oh, nobody cares about me. But they actually are very, they're so vulnerable that they kind of keep to themselves. So this is kind of similar, where you may be excessively shy to the point, I had one book that said other people feel uncomfortable in your presence. And I had to laugh, because that is really how I am. I have the square from the sun to Saturn. And I think they were talking about that and not the moon. Maybe it was the moon, because I also have here the moon square opposing Saturn. That's going to be more on the emotional level, and how you present yourself in terms of your your level of warmth. Again, there can be a parent who is very cold, and so you feel like you're not getting nurtured, and so it's hard for you to be warm because of that. And it's like an inhibition with these hard angles. For me, I think especially with the square, but I'm sure that it's also, it probably is both, because Saturn can be very restrictive. So that is what the inhibition is all about. So emotionally restrictive, and also in terms of your self-expression, your creative self-expression. And so you may seem very stiff. And this is another thing, we talk about Asperger's, which is a mild form of autism, is this idea of flat expression. People who don't have a lot of emphasis in their tone. They're kind of like everything is monotone. That's why I think sometimes there's an overdiagnosis of Asperger's or autism in general, because some people are very, aware of their own emotions and they're very expressive, and they're still diagnosed with um, but anyway, that's just my own opinion. The only reason I'm even speaking out about this is because if somebody gets diagnosed with Asperger's, they may really start to feel that there's something wrong with them and they have this disorder, or they, you know what I mean, just disability. And being able to see patterns and work through them with self awareness, to me, is a very, I'm not going to say it's a very easy thing to do, but it's a possible thing to do. But, believing that there's nothing wrong with you, that, you don't have a disorder just because, you have this kind of awkwardness, I think that's a good thing. I think it's a lot better than feeling like you have this, oh, wow, you have this condition or what have you. So, the last thing I'm going to mention is the square between Venus and Saturn, or the opposition. This can be, I see this sometimes with people who feel like they were not loved by their parents, and they have a they, this is again a feeling like you might feel like you don't have love you don't have the capacity to be loved. Um, and that can affect the way that the person behaves, and maybe even feeling a certain social rejection. I think they said something about, uh, oh, yeah, another thing I should mention is Venus and Mars, because the squares and oppositions can be really important for how the person behaves as well, because that can lead sometimes with the Venus Mars opposition or square to socially inappropriate behavior. Again, what is socially inappropriate? Who decides that? But this sense of decorum, which Venus represents, clashing with Mars, which can be very aggressive. Venus can be very conciliatory, can be very, concerned with being gracious, and Mars can be very crude. So this kind of person may not know how to regulate that. And so they come across other people as very socially inept, or what's the word? Uncouth. Yeah, I don't know. Something like that. So same with the Venus squaring or opposing Saturn, there can be a feeling of being starved out of love. And so that can also, be that domino effect where then the person starts to isolate themselves, and then they feel like it's like a vicious cycle, because then they may be doing it as well to themselves, keeping themselves out of social interactions, and then they complain that they don't have relationships, but they are afraid to put themselves out there. So it's very interesting, how these things can play out. And I just wanted to, touch upon them. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.